Well, hello everybody and welcome to today's Vermont Hops Power Hour webinar. My name is Deb Haliba and I work at the University of Vermont Extension Northwest Crops and Soils program, and I'm, as you know, providing assistance for this webinar series. I'm joined today by Scott Lewins and our featured speaker, who is agricultural engineer Chris Callahan. So before I turn the mic over to Chris, I wanted to provide a few quick housekeeping reminders. First, we are very grateful to the Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program, SARE, for funding support for this project. We are recording the webinar today and we'll provide the URL to the recording later on this week. As a reminder, our session is scheduled for 60 minutes. We'll have about 40 or so minute presentation time, and then we'll ask you to respond to two quick poll questions and then spend the remaining of our time together answering any questions you might have. So with that, today we will be talking about harvest and post-harvest considerations in the hop yard with Chris Callahan. Chris is the Assistant Extension Professor of Agricultural Engineering at the University of Vermont. His work focuses on the application of engineering to food systems among his many projects, including post-harvest storage, greenhouse efficiency, energy use. Chris has been instrumental in the development of harvest and post-harvest hop equipment, including, namely, the mobile hop harvester and modular hop toast. And with that, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Deb, good morning. I just want to check audio still okay? And
Yep, sounds good. Thanks.
Super. Thanks for having me. So welcome, folks. I see there's about 7 of us on the line. I can't tell who you are right now, but we'll maybe get into that a little bit later in the chat box. The first part of this will be mainly me talking, just because of the way we do webinars, and then I'm hoping we can have some interaction either via the chat box or by opening up individual mics as we go. We'll see how it goes. To start, I'd love to get a sense for who's out there and what your current experiences have been with hops. So in the chat box, if you could just sort of let me know maybe where you are, what size hop operation you have going, and maybe tell me a little bit about how you currently dry your hops. And so just take some time to put that in the chat box, and while you're doing that, I can I'll move along with the presentation. My focus today is really going to be on mainly drying, but in order to get there, I wanted to make sure we started with a little bit of a review on harvest timing and readiness. And so we tend to want to harvest when there's between 20 and 23% dry matter in the hops, and that depends a little bit on variety. But the point is that there is a quantifiable harvest period for optimal quality, and that's based on this dry matter, which is really the opposite of moisture content. And you can determine this by weighing and drying and then weighing again. And we do have a little tool here, the UVM Extension Hop Harvest Moisture Calculator, which is available at this short URL, go.uvm.edu/hop moisture. And just to give you a quick example of that, this is the moisture calculator in real time. And so the idea is you take a sample of your hops and put in the sample weight as it is, and subtract the weight of any container that you're using, and put that weight in here, and then dry it until that weight stops changing. In other words, you put it in a microwave and maybe do 10 or 20 seconds at a time, and then wait for that weight to stop changing, and then you know you're at 0% moisture. And so if you put those numbers in, let's say you start with 100 grams and you dry until it's maybe 22 grams, then you know you're at 78% moisture content or 22% dry matter. And you could tell that by these numbers also. But if you do have a sort of an odd weight, something other than 100 grams, this calculator can help you get that information. The other thing you can do is use this calculator to determine what moisture a sample in a batch of being dried is at, and so you can tell when you're done drying, and so the calculator goes through that as well. We offer it in a couple of forms. One is just as a calculated result right here, but then also as a table, a lookup table, and so you can tell where you are as you're drying. So the point being, we want to make sure we're harvesting at the right time for optimal quality, and this tool can help you get there. And there are, I should note, there are instructional videos on both drying and the use of the calculator at the Crops and Soils, Northwest Crops and Soils website, instructional wiki rather. Okay, so everybody loves hop harvest season, especially when you have lots of hands helping. It's a good old time. There's usually some beverages involved and sometimes some music, and really nothing can go wrong, especially if you have good, efficient harvesting practices. Maybe you have a harvester, or maybe you just have lots of friends who are willing to help. At the end of the day, we have wet hops that either if you're fortunate, you've already sold them and your local brewers are waiting patiently for them so they can use them in a harvest brew, but more likely you're going to need to dry them to store them for long-term storage and use. And so the basic idea is we want to remove that nearly 78 or 80% moisture, which is truly just water. We want to remove that from the hops so that we're storing a relatively dry product that avoids it from molding and otherwise decaying. And so we use air to carry away the vapor, carry away water as vapor. And this is really just similar to, say, drying clothes on a clothesline or in a clothes dryer. And the difference being that we need to make sure we have air moving through all of the hops as they're laid out. And we also want to be careful of temperature. So we need to remove that moist air also. So a number of times I've received calls from folks who have made a nice cabinet with screened trays for drying hops, and they've put it in a basement of a barn, or and they've started drying and it's been going well, and then they sort of hit a plateau where the hops won't dry any further. And the issue is that they've really just been pumping water vapor out of the hops and into the space around the dryer, and haven't really made any provision for getting that now very humid air out of the drying area. So want to make sure we have a way of getting that out of the space, and my preference would be that if you have a fan associated with your dryer, with your oast, have that fan actually intentionally exhaust that moist air out of the oast and out of the room where the oast is. We're really aiming for nice ambient air to be pulled through those through the hops. So we use fans to ensure a well-mixed drying area, so within the oast, and then we also use fans or open windows or doors to make sure we have fresh makeup air. We want to make sure that we're measuring starting and ending moisture content using tools such as the moisture calculator. So as I said, drying really is a matter of removing water, and so we start at 77 to 80% moisture at harvest, and we're looking for 8 to 10% moisture for a moisture content for stable storage. So for every dry pound of hops, we need to boil off about 3.5 pounds of water. And so, the bottom line is customers really want that 22% of the product that is not water. And we use heat to do this, and I'll get into that in just a second. And so this really becomes a race between evaporating that moisture in the form of water vapor off of the product. It's a race between that and oxidation. And oxidation is, when oxygen oxidizes the alpha and beta acids, the things that you're selling in the form of hops. And so that happens whether we want it to or not, but we do some things to minimize it, such as storing hops in dried form that have been sealed against air and also at low temperatures. So this is a great graph that I like. It comes from a relatively old report that Rich Andrews from Colorado drew to my attention. It's actually from 1975, but there really isn't a whole lot that's changed. What you're looking at is a chart of alpha acid versus time, and that's the one that kind of goes down initially and then up and then levels off. And the other one is moisture content, and the way we know there's a difference is, the way we know the difference is moisture content only goes down and then it steadies out. And so the point here is you're looking at 3 different drying air temperatures, and I want to make sure it's clear that that's the air temperature, not the hop temperature. And so there's 118 Fahrenheit, 140 Fahrenheit, and 149 Fahrenheit. What this is showing is the change in alpha acid content at the same time as the moisture content change. And the sort of takeaway from this is they achieved peak alpha acid content in this batch at using 118 Fahrenheit air in 8 hours. And so that moisture content is about, they get to about 10% in that period of time. So this is just to demonstrate we want to get rid of as much moisture as we can down to the storage moisture at as quickly as possible within the limit of temperature so that we don't negatively impact the alpha acid content. So the way we're doing this is by heating the air, or you can just use ambient air as well, although it's challenging to get a good even drying in a reasonable amount of time. And so the air around us can carry a fixed amount of water vapor, and it depends on the temperature of the air and its current relative humidity. And relative humidity is just a measure of how much of the maximum water vapor that could be held in the air is actually in the air. And so all else being equal, warm air can carry more moisture than cool air. And that's why we heat the air that we use in our clothes dryers and other drying applications. But generally we want to keep the product, in this case, below 105 degrees Fahrenheit. I should also note that dehumidifiers have been used, that is to actually reduce the relative humidity of the air without increasing its temperature. Some folks have put dehumidifiers in their drying cabinets. And so that can work as well, especially if you have maybe limited electricity to drive a heater, but a dehumidifier might actually work better for you. Point being, what we're looking to do is reduce the relative humidity. We need to make sure that air that's hitting the hops is dry enough in relative terms to pick up more moisture as it flows by the hops. So here's an example using Burlington weather and just looking at the ambient temperature and relative humidity in Burlington in the months of August and September. On the top line, if I just use ambient air, it's 72% relative humidity and I don't add heat. In order to dry 1 pound of hops and keep airflow below 1 foot per second, anything higher, any velocity higher than that tends to lead to bouncing of the hops and some shatter and loss of lupulin. So we want to try to keep the velocity less than 1 foot per second. And so in order to do this with ambient air, it requires about 24 cubic feet per minute for 8 hours of drying time per pound of hops. And so that means that our drying area is 24 to 48 square feet. If we are able to add a little bit of heat, in this case a third of a watt, we can increase the temperature of that drying air to 118 degrees Fahrenheit, which has the impact of reducing relative humidity. So now we have really, almost desert condition air that can go over the hops and really pick up moisture very effectively. And the other impact it has is that we don't need as much airflow through the hops, and so we can do this in a smaller footprint. So this is just showing the impact of adding a little bit of heat to air. You can dry the same amount of hops with less airflow, or more hops with the same airflow. So my wife and I lived in England for a while. We used to go for walks sort of southeast of London in an area near Kent, and you see lots of buildings like this in that area out in the middle of farms, and these are actually oasts. So these were intended for drying hops, and they are sort of a peculiar setup. They're also really well maintained for their age. And what's going on inside is they traditionally had some sort of coal fire, and they would add brimstone, which is sulfur, on top of that, and they would actually burn both the coal and the brimstone would burn as well. And I didn't realize this, but it was basically treating the drying hops with sulfur. It opened up the bracts and then it opened up the leaves of the cones or flowers and enabled drying much quicker. It also had the effect of the same effect that we have from applying sulfur during cultivation, and that it helped manage some post-harvest diseases. Anyway, this is the inside of one of those buildings, and it really is just an oven, and the exhaust from the fire goes up through a perforated floor, through hops. It dries them, and then it has a nice chimney up above. And the rest of this has to do with packing things up and bringing in green hops. But we can do it much more simply too, and this is not an uncommon way that folks are drying hops in their first or second year, getting started. Just use a couple of window screens, lay them out on sawhorses, or in this case chairs. Single layer of hops on window screens like this, maybe with a box fan, just to ensure there's some fresh air making it into the space. It can be very effective at drying things down. Usually not within 8 hours. Usually takes a bit longer, but it still gets the job done. Getting into higher volumes, you might need something a little bit bigger, but again, this setup at Square Nail Hops Farm in Ferrisburgh, Vermont is still using ambient air. There's no heating here. They have 6,000 CFM floor fans. That round yellow floor fan is blowing into an empty plenum, so just a manifold of empty space that goes to about half the height of that drying box, and then a screened floor, and they had at this point maybe 4 or 6 inches of hops on top of that. So that was a very, very effective way of drying higher volumes, usually of fewer varieties. A little more complex, and maybe for folks who might have a few more varieties to dry, or folks who are harvesting at with more frequency. So not getting it all done on a Saturday, but maybe spreading the harvest out over a longer period of time. It might be helpful to have multiple trays. And so this was a modular hops oast that Roger Rainville, Heather Darby, and I, and some other folks on Heather's team came up with. It's based on, of all things, an ostrich egg incubator that Roger had experience with. And when we were going through the original design of this and walking through what we were trying to achieve, Roger said, really what we're trying to do is just have good, even temperature distribution and relative humidity distribution in a box, right? And we said, yeah, I guess that is what we're after. And he said, well, I've got just the thing. And so he had an ostrich egg incubator, and we've sort of adapted this design to recreate some of the features of that. So what are some of the features of that? As we just said, a very consistent temperature, both consistent relative to time, it doesn't vary much, but also consistent and uniform within the space, and so it's well mixed. The other thing that it allowed was you could add smaller batches of multiple harvests into the oast at different times and still be able to keep them separate with the multiple trays. The other thing we did here is we ended up creating a side-by-side design, and the idea was each one of these is roughly 4 by 4, 4 wide by 4 deep by 8 feet tall, roughly. And so the idea was you could start out with one cabinet, and as your operation or your yield increased, you could add sections and have more space. These have also seen, a number of folks have used these for drying other things, small batches of grain, other herbs, medicinal herbs or culinary herbs. So this is really sort of taken on a life of its own. I do want to quickly show the Farm Hack page where this lives. So Farm Hack, for those who are not familiar with it, is an open source farm design and sharing community, and you can see all sorts of really cool little designs here for lots of different things, from pedal-powered cultivation tools to water wheel transplanters, you name it. And so the idea is that this really is open source, it's crowdsourced, and it's solutions designed by farmers and other practitioners based on specified needs. And so I posted the Modular Hop Toast here, and so if you want more detail on it, you can go to farmhack.org. Deb has posted the link in the chat box. And for example, if you open up this PDF, it's the details of the Toast, including a bill of materials, some wiring diagrams, and basic plans for the box, a single box. So it's good for lower volume of fewer varieties. It does result in a very well mixed environment. This fan that you see here mounted on the ceiling does two things. It provides nice uniform flow within the box, and also the little 1-inch PVC pipes that you see you can see two of them in this picture. There are two also towards us in this picture. That's how fresh air comes in from outside, and by having it come in that way, it sort of gets mixed in with the rest of the box air very well. So you're not shocking the top tray, for example, but every tray gets a little bit of the fresh, dry air. The outlet air goes through the larger hole that's just above the fan in this picture, and that can be ducted outside directly, so you don't have any buildup of humidity in the space. In this design, it's controlled, the temperature is controlled by what's called a PID controller. It stands for proportional, integral, and differential. Proportional, integral, and differential. And so what it's doing is it's looking at what the actual temperature is, what your set point temperature is, and it's constantly taking that into account and adjusting the output of the heater accordingly, so that you don't, for example, if you use just a thermostat, the heater would come on until it hit the right temperature, and then the heater would shut off, but it would overshoot that temperature. And so you would have a lot more variability than you do with a PID controller. Okay, well mixed, well controlled drying environment. A little bit more construction and nuance to this, but certainly doable. A number of people have built these and are enjoying the benefit of it. Even bigger, larger scale, had the opportunity to work with Nathaniel Latoile and Jean Latoile at 4-Star Farms in Northfield, Massachusetts, as they were looking to scale up their drying setup. So these are, I think, roughly 4 by 8 containers, and I think they went as deep as a foot with these. And you can see in the right-hand picture a radiator, which is the sort of screen-looking box on the, and then the airflow for this was provided by a floor fan, the yellow fan that you see there. And the radiator received heat from a boiler. So a hot water boiler would create heat, and it fed, I think they did 3 of these, possibly 4 of these. My memory's failing me. So 1 boiler for 4 dryers. And then they also had a nice setup with an overhead hoist to move the bins back and forth. So fair bit of infrastructure here and investment of time and money, but for large volumes, it seemed to work very well. The other development that I've just recently learned about is these drying floors being offered by hopharvester.com. Folks might be familiar with other perforated floors available from folks like Wolf. There are other companies providing them. These are sort of nicely sized. I think what you're looking at on the right-hand side is roughly 4 feet deep by 8 feet wide by maybe 10 feet tall. And so the basic footprint of these perforated floors is 4 by 4. And so you buy you buy them as sections, and you can build your own multi-tier drying setup. And the idea is that the wetter hops going up top, so you're loading in from the top, and as you remove drier hops out from the bottom, each floor fills the next floor. So it goes from top to the next floor down to the next floor down. And the nice thing about that is the bottom tray, which is the driest hops, are getting the driest air right off of the heated or ambient fan outlet. And then the wetter hops, you can still remove moisture from wetter hops even if the air has picked up a little bit of moisture from the drier hops. So there's a nice sort of differential or continuum here. And it makes handling a lot easier. So you're not taking trays and dumping them manually, but you're just using gravity. You fill it once and gravity helps you the rest of the way. Get in touch with John Bonzo at hopsharvester.com for more information on that. And so again, just to review, we're trying to remove moisture, which is water from the hops. We use air to carry it away. We usually heat that air, and we want to make sure that we're removing any of that moist air from the space, so make sure to plan for exhaust and for makeup air. We also use fans to ensure a well-mixed drying area. We want to try to have each hop cone receive the same temperature and humidity air at the same rate, and so that's the goal. And that's why we tend to have these things laid out so flat. And then the other thing is to be sure to measure starting and ending moisture content, and so that sort of by definition means we're measuring it along the way. And so that hop harvester calculator, hop harvest moisture calculator that I mentioned is available both in that web format, but it's also available as an Excel spreadsheet. So if you want to keep track of things along the way, it's set up to do that for you. My contact information is here. Happy to chat with folks about all things hops harvesting and post-harvest. I mainly wanted to focus today on drying, but perhaps there's other topics folks want to get into.